The Disrupt Education vlog can be found on YouTube. To hear it in podcast form, search Disrupt Education on any of the following podcast platforms: Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Breaker, Castbox, Overcast, Radio Public, Pocket Cast, Spotify, or Stitcher. We traveled to Florida to meet with my dad. Sunny Florida. Disrupt Education. The vlog starts now. Welcome to this episode of Disrupt Education. Today I have my father, who was a big inspiration for me in education and understanding how it works and what things don't work. So tell us a little bit about your journey into becoming a math teacher.
The decision was actually made in the 8th grade. I had a teacher called Mr. Bucklew. He was a history teacher, a social studies teacher. And he had summers off, and he had a real nice new car. He was not married, and I thought, man, this is the way to live. So I was aimed for teaching from then on. It was pretty much the case. I knew I needed to go to college to get a degree, and I chose the college because I had a chance for a football scholarship. And when I went down to Ball State, number one, they were a teacher's college at the time. And number two, I saw a guy on that team that was I played against in high school, and I knew I could play there. So I ended up playing there, got a partial scholarship, and got my degree, and off I went. I had actually had a chance to get a postgraduate grant from the NCAA because my grades were so good, believe it or not. And I declined it because I got married one week after I graduated. So you talk about major life decisions.
Yeah.
In a 1 week really made a difference. So then I ended up, I picked a school to go teach at that was halfway between my wife's parents' house and my parents' house, up in Michigan City. And fortunately they were paying probably one of the highest salaries in the state. So that's essentially where I got, and started out teaching 6th, 7th graders, 7th and 8th grade I think it was, and teaching math because it was an easy subject for me, which I don't know if that's a real good thing. If it's easy for the teacher, they kind of think that it's easy for everybody, and that certainly is not the case.
Right.
So
you taught math in middle school and then also in high school for 30-some years.
38 years.
38 years. What, as the subject grew over the years, and did they add more math to the game? Was it just basic algebra at the beginning? What did math look like over those 30 years?
Well, 7th grade math was what you would think of just doing applications in regular adding and subtracting, change, and things like that. But it wasn't. When I was started teaching the 7th grade, they had math that used set notation. They were just getting into that. And the textbook I had said to show the kids how to organize the numbers so you could get them in tens or hundreds or whatever, and so they would understand why adding was done this way and why. And I tried to teach that for about a month, and I was observed after, toward the end of that 6-week period. The assistant principal came in and was watching me, and the kids were having trouble picking it up. It was that new quote math. And he told me after the lesson, he said, "We don't teach that anymore." So I had to put up with things that changed quite a bit. The other thing that has changed a lot is it used to be at the lower grades, even in the high school, you'd have business math for kids who weren't going into that higher mathematics. But now with tests and everything, they want everybody to take algebra, which is very frustrating for a lot of the kids. And then when they do fairly well in that, they take geometry, which drives more of them crazy. It just is just. I'll tell you a little story. We went to. I had a trip with, actually it was a government class that went to the prison at Michigan City, and we were sitting in there, and one of the guys, the guy that was giving them the lecture on what you had to do when you walk through the cells and stuff, he said, by the way, did any of you know the Pythagorean theorem? And a few kids raised their hands, and he said, you're never going to need that. You never use it. And then, of course, all the kids looked at me, and I said, yeah, okay. But, yeah, that's kind of the frustrating part of teaching math. But I stayed with math because, you know, everybody said, you have to have it, you have to have it. And the other thing that kind of gave me a break is when the computers really started getting into the high schools. We ended up teaching some programming languages, which I enjoyed. And one of the things you could do with Fortran, which was the language we used, was actually teach the computer to play songs. And that was the little numbers with the length of the notes, and it was really interesting.
And through that, then, you know, trigonometry, algebra, calculus, stats, all these things started coming in. Were they in the high school when you started? Was there calculus in high school?
Actually, we had different degrees of classes as I went through high school. I actually took trigonometry and calculus as a senior in high school. But there was only one class of it, I believe, and a fairly large. We had 300 in a graduating class. So I essentially learned it there. When I did get to Ball State, though, interestingly enough, I started out with analytic geometry, which is a step below trigonometry and calculus, and then I kind of bumped up to trig, and then we were in quarters, so the third quarter, or the springtime, I had to go back and take calculus. And of course I forgot everything. So it was rather interesting. I was a good B plus, you know, some A's, but that was a C course for me, and I was lucky to get that.
So over your 38 years in the business, what was the best kind of way that you figured that would reach the most people teaching math?
Well, unfortunately, I was more a lecturer, but the best way to teach them, honestly, was to give them a test about once every Friday, and then I literally let them come up and ask me questions. And
during the test?
During the test, yeah. And I'd let them ask me, because you know, kids don't want to ask because it's embarrassing or whatever, but if they come up and ask me things, I'd give them a hint, and pretty good hint that would give them an idea what they were supposed to do. And I think that was one of the things that I did that, in fact, I remember one of my students that came back and we were talking about it, and he said that was the most enlightening thing he had. So.
Where would you like to see education go, you know, from your grandchildren on?
Well, the biggest thing that I have a problem with is application. And kids, at a lot of the time, could not understand what a fraction is, what a number over another number is. And they didn't know how to work with them, and they didn't know that if they learned them, they could do math a lot simpler and a lot quicker. And it was very frustrating for me when kids that were coming into 9th grade could not simply multiply or divide. I mean, they couldn't. I mean, not big numbers. I'm talking about, you know, 27 divided by 3, things like that. And that they didn't know the hints either. You know, if a number has digits that add up to 9 or a multiple of 9, it's divisible by 9. Kids didn't know that. They didn't know those things. And I still remember as a child going through elementary school, we had rote tests. You had to memorize. And everybody knew how to do that. The other thing that was frustrating for my wife was when she had kids who were working the concessions at ball games, people would come in and they'd buy something for 75 cents or 79 cents, and the kids would have to make change, and they'd go over to the calculator to get the change. They couldn't figure out, they couldn't do the subtraction, it just wasn't there. She was appalled at the fact that they all had to have a calculator with them.
With technology coming through, how important is it, do you think, for kids to actually continue to memorize those basic fractions, or like the times table and things like that? Because your grandchildren are going through that, and they still understand that, but then there's also a fight where, you know, why can't I just tell this to that? So what are your thoughts on that?
I think with the technology now, if you have the right programs, I think you can get the answers right away, but you better have a calculator with you or a phone with you or something. And to me, you're really limiting yourself, and education is limiting kids. What happened, especially with the kids that had trouble with rote memory or just didn't want to mess with that, they would get to the calculator early at a young age. And there's an age in there. Piaget, I think, was the gentleman that talked about that, where rote memory is probably the best way to get to learn something in your second, third grade area. And if they don't get it then they're lagging behind in math anyway for quite a while. It's almost like reading. If they're not reading by a certain age, they're held back.
Out of all the maths out there in life in general, what do you think is the most important math subject to know?
Just the basic math. I mean, a lot of people you don't get to algebra, really. I mean, if you get into real life and you're delivering stuff, or you're working in a store, or you're at the grocery store, whatever, I don't see many people with a calculator or a phone trying to figure out what the averages are. In fact, on some of their some of the objects up on the shelves now, if you're buying food, for example, that'll tell you what the cost per ounce of each package is, so you can compare them that way. But kids don't really understand. A lot of people don't understand that.
Right. You used to be able to, we just did that. Like we would look at the ounces versus the price, or the quarts, or what have you. So
well, that's because people can't literally see percentages and ratios now, because again, you're back to fractions and whatever. But the same thing with making change and decimal. It just kids want to use decimals all the time.
Right. So, well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for being on Disrupt Education. A huge person who I wrote a blog where you told me not to get into education, and now I am in an education. But I appreciate it. You've given me a lot of wisdom. You've given a lot of people wisdom about not only just subject-wise, but also being a coach and just a dad. So I appreciate it. And you were actually the first disruptor of education when I saw what you did with students and brought them through math and kind of made it real for them rather than just a number out there. So. So
when they see applications, even when you get to algebra, geometry, when you see applications in physics and chemistry, I think it can really motivate kids and really help them get into the area of math and or some kind of chemistry or physics.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right. Until next time, guys, we'll see you on Disrupt Education.